What's up, film fans? Welcome to Movie Talk with Aaron Hunter. I'm Aaron Hunter, and we're going to continue our talk about gritty 70s crime films. This time around, the film's not so sort of scuzzy as Charlie Varick was, but in its own way, it's darker, more twisted, definitely more cynical. So join me as we discuss Night Moves from 1975 in this episode of What Makes This Film Great. Night Moves is a 1975 neo-noir, not to be confused with the 2013 eco-noir of the same title, directed by Kelly Reichardt. And I think I'm going to talk about Kelly Reichardt in a near future series, so I might have more to say about that film. But this one's from 75. It was directed by Arthur Penn and written by the Scottish screenwriter Alan Sharp. It has cinematography by Bruce Surtees, who's the son of the sort of famous classical era cinematographer Robert Surtees. And Bruce Surtees did a lot of work in the 70s with Don Siegel. He didn't shoot Charlie Varick, but he did a lot of other Siegel films, and then went on to work closely with Clint Eastwood, and he shot The Outlaw Josie Wales and a bunch of other Eastwood films. And it features the editing of Dee Dee Allen, who had been partnered with Arthur Penn since 1967's Bonnie and Clyde, when she made a huge splash, hugely influential splash on Hollywood filmmaking with her editing style on Bonnie and Clyde. If you want to know a little bit more about that, you can check out this video from my series on New Hollywood. And I'll talk a little bit more about Dee Dee Allen's work later in the video. The film came sort of near the tail end of Penn's kind of rise as one of the preeminent auteurs of the early New Hollywood era. At this point, he had made Bonnie and Clyde, Alice's Restaurant, and Little Big Man, all really well-received sort of genre, but also countercultural films. And Night Moves was the first kind of dent in his reputation, and it's not because it's a bad film, and I'll come back to this. It's a very good film, and it was well-received critically at the time, but it didn't have legs commercially. And his next film, a Western, The Missouri Breaks, with Marlon Brando and Jack Nicholson, fared even worse. And after that, his reputation as an auteur kind of waned, even though he continued making films and directing theater for over a decade more. But Night Moves, it's kind of inexplicable why it wouldn't have done well in 1975. But as I said, I'll come back to that. One of the reasons it seems like it would have been more popular is it stars Gene Hackman, who was one of the biggest actors of the era. And he plays Harry Mosby. Mosby's a retired professional football player who's now a private detective. And this is where the crime element comes in. The film also stars Susan Clark as Harry's wife, Ellen. Some of you of my generation might recognize her as the mom on Webster. Jennifer Warren plays Paula. Harris Yulin plays Marty. And Yulin's one of those faces that pops up throughout the 70s, 80s, and into the 90s. And he was very good at playing sort of sophisticated types. And some of you might recognize him as Quentin Travers, the head of the Watchers Guild on Buffy the Vampire Slayer. There's also a young James Woods in the film, and a very fresh-faced Melanie Griffith, whose casting and performance caused a little kind of a minor controversy at the time. And Janet Ward as Arlene, a kind of aging, washed-up B-movie starlet whose daughter goes missing, which becomes the case that kicks off the film. The film's story or narrative is quite simple at first, or so it seems. Harry gets a call from a fellow private detective, a friend of his, who's always trying to recruit Harry into his larger sort of multi-detective agency, which Harry resists. You know, he's an individual man on his own. He wants to do things his own way. But they share cases, and Harry gets this case, and he goes to see Arlene. And Arlene, as I said, is this kind of washed-up B-movie actress. And her daughter, 16-year-old Deli, played by Melanie Griffith, is missing. Arlene's not sure if she's run away, if she's been abducted. She's been hanging around with sort of unsavory guys, guys meant to give Arlene a headache. And there's an indication in the early interview scenes that Arlene and Deli maybe don't get along all that well. And as it unfolds in the film, the reason for this is that Deli's father was a once very famous Hollywood producer, a fictional producer, who married Arlene when she was young and beautiful and on the way up.
I got lucky. I grabbed off one of the big guns, Irving Grasta. Oh, I had lovely tits, even if I do say so myself. They're sitting on a little bit of silicone now, but when they were up for grabs, they were really something special.
And after they divorced, he left a lot of money to Deli, which she won't come into until she matures. So Arlene's in charge of it, but Arlene only gets the money as long as Deli lives with her. So there's a sense that, yeah, she wants to find her daughter. She's worried. She's 16. But she's very blasé about the fact that Deli smokes marijuana, drinks, goes out with older men, and so on. So she doesn't seem that concerned for her well-being. And once we find out about the sort of money situation, Arlene's motivations for finding Deli become a little more sort of, if not suspect, at least less maternal, let's say. And that's the case. And it's a pretty easy case. One of the great things about it is that it takes us into the sort of scuzzy B-movie world of 70s Hollywood. And I love films that Hollywood makes about Hollywood, but I especially love 70s films about Hollywood because it really wants to show you the kind of, you know, in this case, where the stuntmen work, where the B-movie directors work, the sort of cheap sets. And the cheap set will become an important part of the film later on. The mechanics in this case, played by James Woods, young James Woods. So, you know, there's this world that Deli may have moved into, and Harry's going to go investigate this. He has to go to New Mexico at first. He gets a lead there that leads him to Florida. And there Deli is. It's a bit of a spoiler, I guess, but it happens about 25 or 30 minutes into the film, and it seems kind of like, case cracked? Was it that easy? Harry seems incredibly competent. Gene Hackman plays Harry with a mix of sort of wounded confidence, and it's a great performance by Hackman. And at this point, I think we tend to forget how good Hackman was because he had a reputation for being sort of wisecracky and a little bit loud. But if you look at his performances in Bonnie and Clyde, also directed by Arthur Penn, but in something like The Conversation, the Francis Ford Coppola film from just a couple years earlier, or The French Connection from '71, all of these characters are a little bit gruff, a little bit on edge. But one of the great things about Hackman's performances, you see this in the Poseidon Adventure even, is the way he's able to sort of modulate that gruffness as a way to reflect on who his character is. So Harry Caul in The Conversation is quiet and reserved, and that sort of Hackman gruffness only comes out when he strikes because, you know, the world he's constructed for himself is kind of under attack, whether by intruders into his workspace or a girlfriend that he doesn't trust. Other times he's very sedate and he keeps himself very sort of closed off, whereas Popeye Doyle in The French Connection is a live wire ready to pop at any second. And Hackman invests all of these characters with this sort of coiled rage that he unleashes differently depending on the character he's playing. And if you watch his early 70s performances, you see how good he is at sort of tempering his emotional performance based on the character he's playing. And in Night Moves, Harry is a nice guy. He's married to Ellen, who's some sort of art dealer or gallery owner, and they seem to have a pretty good relationship. In fact, part of what makes Night Moves interesting is that in addition to the mystery, the case, where's Deli, what's going on, there's this domestic story. And that's one of my favorite things about it, is that Harry's relationship with Ellen is explored in a lot of different ways in the film, whereas a lot of times you get the gumshoe who's cynical about women because some Dane broke his heart a million years ago and he'll never learn to love again and all of this sort of stuff. As Night Moves kicks off, Harry and Ellen seem to have a very good relationship. We're going to find out soon enough that there's, a darker side to it, and I'll come back to that. But this domestic story is investigated throughout the film. So even though we have a lot of scenes of Harry, interviewing people, putting the heat on a perp, and, doing all these sorts of things, some of the mundane work, investigating people's biographies and so on, this mundane work of private detectiving, private investigating, we also get a lot of stories of him spending time with Ellen in their house, at her place of work and so on. In fact, that's basically how the film opens. We get a short scene of him getting a message in his detective agency, and then we cut to this scene.
What brings you across the tracks?
Oh, I just have to go visit one of the beautiful people.
Huh? How'd you get to meet one of the beautiful people?
It was one of Nick's handouts.
Have you had any second thoughts about joining his agency?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's not an agency, that's an information factory. I'd go bananas there in 1 week. Can I get some cash from you?
Yeah, it's right there. You gonna be late tonight?
Oh, I don't know. Why?
Charles and I are going to see a Romer film my night at Maud's. Want to come?
It's nice, right? And, it's nice to see a noir film, or a noirish or neo-noir, whatever, where the the detective has a good, seemingly healthy relationship with his partner. The problem is all's not perfect, and we find that out relatively early in the film. Ellen has gone with her assistant in the gallery to watch a film, a Romer film, and the film actually has this kind of famous joke in it.
We're going to see a Romer film my night at Maud's. Want to come?
I don't think so. I saw a Romer film once. It was kind of like watching paint dry.
Right. Actually, Arthur Penn was a big fan of Romer, and that's kind of a meta joke in the film. But they've invited Harry along. Harry decides not to go because he's got to start working the case. But he finishes his day early, so he goes to sort of surprise Ellen and say hi to her after the film lets out, and this happens. So now Harry's really got two cases in a way. He spends most of his time looking for Deli, and he goes down to New Mexico, he comes back, and so on. But now he wants to find out who this man is in the car with his wife, kissing his wife. And eventually he finds out that this is a man named Marty, played by Harris Yulin, and that this affair has been going on for some time. And a lot of the film is taken up with Harry's attempts to discern how serious it is. And Marty says, I think it's serious for her, it's not so serious for me. And it turns out what's really going on is Ellen is feeling unsatisfied in her relationship with Harry. And this is a blow to Harry, because Harry believed, as that opening scene kind of establishes, that he's got it all going on. He's in a good, solid relationship. We find out over the course of the film that he's opened up to her in a way that maybe wasn't typical of 70s tough guys. He's told her about his childhood. He's talked to her about his parents. There's some twists there too that I won't go into, but you know, they seem to have an emotionally grounded relationship. So when he finds out that's not the case, that she's having this affair because she feels something lacking in their relationship, the ground shifts underneath him. And that could be played in a lot of films just as kind of character development, but it becomes important in the investigative plot because of the way that Harry finds Deli when he finds her early in the film. Deli, as it turns out, has been dating this mechanic played by James Woods, who has a garage of his own, but who also does work on movies. And he had taken her to this set in New Mexico. And Deli is, as we find out, Deli is, as it turns out, a young woman. Well, she's still a girl, really. She's 16. Chasing experience, and in particular in this film, chasing experience with men. And it's implied that she's learned this behavior from her mother, who's also kind of chasing men. And so while on set in New Mexico, Deli dumps the mechanic in favor of this stuntman, this stunt pilot. And they get into a fight and the mechanic runs away. And this is when she goes missing. And it turns out she's gone on to Florida, where her stepfather lives, and he's running this sort of Key West, like low rent Key West, sort of tour boat, diving boat company with Paula, played by Jennifer Warren. And the stepfather, Tom, was also once involved in the film industry as well. But now he's down in Key West, and Deli's there, and Harry finds her, and it's simple. But he finds her after his discovery of Ellen's affair. And what he also finds down there is Paula. And Paula is very hard to read throughout the film, and that's intentional for a lot of reasons. But she's living there with Tom, and it seems that they have a business partnership in this boat that they take divers out on, but they're also raising dolphins for probably SeaWorld or something like that. She says people want to buy dolphins and put them in their pool. It seems very unethical, but that's the world of this film. It's these marginalized people who are doing what they can to get by. And as Paula's story unfolds, we see that that's her life, that she's comes from an abusive childhood, that she's worked for a time as a stripper, as a prostitute, as a waitress, and now she feels like she's got something stable going on. And Harry can't tell, is Paula with Tom? He even asks her, and she never answers. She's very enigmatic, but he falls for her. And this is a very important part of the story, because there's Paula, there's Tom, there's Deli, and as the film gets scuzzier, what we realize is that Deli's actually gone down there to try to seduce Tom. And one of the things that she's doing is trying to seduce her mother's former lovers in a way to kind of get back at her mother. She's 16, so this is, you know, illegal and abusive, and it's a rape situation.
I got pretty foolish with her, and well, you've seen her. God, there ought to be a law.
There is.
But Harry stays down there for a few days because Deli takes some convincing, and during that time, he has a brief affair with Paula, and they kind of have an emotional connection. They both feel like outsiders. They both feel a little bit rejected. And to him, this is an important moment, and it's lovely. And then he takes Deli, he goes home, and case solved. And now he's going to go kind of work on his marriage. And you're like, wow, that was the easiest case I've ever seen in a 70s detective film. But you look at your watch and like, oh, there's 40 minutes left to go. At this point, the film takes a turn. And I don't want to spoil it for you if you haven't seen the film, but people whom Harry has interviewed start dying. And he thinks he understands why. He thinks he knows what's going on, and he's going to nail those involved. So all of a sudden, what was once a pretty simple missing persons case, teenage girl run off, in a lot of ways it's kind of like the story of The Big Lebowski, only serious and less sort of comedic. But that turns into something more, something deeper. Whereas in like Lebowski, it seems like it's something more, but it's actually not. In Night Moves, it is. It's something that you won't expect, but it connects the different people along the trail. And Harry thinks he's got it figured out, and he's wrong. And then he thinks he's got it figured out again, and he's wrong. And in a lot of ways, it reminds me of Chinatown, which had just come out the year before, and the very different look, very different aesthetic. Chinatown set several decades earlier. Night Moves is a contemporary 70s film. The clothes are different, the music's different, and so on. But this sense that we have this intelligent, resourceful detective who the films lead us to believe are clever guys who are going to get their man or solve their case. And early in Chinatown, Giddy solves his first case. And early in Night Moves, so does Harry. But both of them miss completely what's happening almost in front of their faces. And in Night Moves, there's a nice little metaphor that includes a pun, which is where the film's title comes from, that kind of sums up what's going on. And that's when Harry's down in Florida and he's talking to Paula, and we've seen him a couple times in the film playing chess against himself. He's sitting in his car on a stakeout at one point playing chess, and Paula catches him doing this, and she comes over and asks him what he's doing.
Beating yourself?
That's a position from a game played in 1922. Do you play?
I know the moves.
Well, black had a mate. Didn't see it. Queen sacrifice. And 3 little night moves. Check. Check. Check.
Oh, that's nice.
I'll bring your shirt back in the morning, okay?
Show me that again. Ah, it's a beauty.
Yeah. But he didn't see it. He played something else and he lost. Must have regretted it every day of his life. I know I would have.
So there you get this pun, the 3 little night moves, as in the knight from the chess. But you also get this metaphor that seems very on the nose when you're watching it. You can't help but watch the film at this point. He's already found Deli. You know he's going to take her back. And you know there's still a lot of film left to go. So you're wondering, what are the 3 little moves that Harry's missing? And a lesser film would have spent the next 40 minutes spelling those moves out to you. But Night Moves doesn't. Night Moves hides those moves and keeps them hidden. And this is where the film becomes dark. And this is where the film becomes cynical, because there's a sense as Harry delves deeper into the story that, not that he's in over his head, he's not in over his head, but that no detective's going to get this right because it's too messy. There's too many people involved with too many motivations, and the film is not going to tell us. It's not going to answer the questions that it raises. And this was a very kind of 70s thing to do, this sort of ambiguous open ending. And Night Moves has a wonderfully ambiguous open ending where Harry gets to kind of the end of the line, or at least the end of the line for the film. And we've discovered some things, but we haven't discovered everything. We haven't discovered the big picture. And Harry's kind of wounded, and he's on the boat because after he takes Deli home, he has to go back down to Florida, and he's on the boat. And because he's wounded, he can't steer properly. And the film ends with this wonderful image of the boat just going in circles, which is a much better metaphor than the Three Little Night Moves, which it ends up being kind of not a red herring so much, because there are moves that Harry could have made, but the film never tells us exactly what those are. Trusting certain people, not trusting certain people. There's a scene where Deli leaves him an answering machine message and he doesn't listen to the whole thing. It never tells us what that whole message says, so we don't know. Had he listened to that, would he have figured it out? We don't know. The film isn't going to tell us that. And it's going to leave us with this sense of incapacity, but also just sort of ineffectualness, like nothing that Harry could have done would have saved those lives. Nothing that Harry could have done would have solved this crime, and people are dead, not necessarily because he missed the Three Little Night Moves. People are dead because of the choices they made, and people are dead because sometimes people just die, especially in these fringe, gritty, scuzzy crime worlds. People just die, and the film just wants you to sit with that, this idea that there's nothing to be done. You might hear a description like that and think, yeah, no wonder people didn't go see this film. Nobody wants to sit through a sort of complicated, twisty crime film that doesn't solve the crime, but instead leaves you with this cynical message about the pointlessness of life. Maybe not today, but this was 1975. This was the year of Nashville. This was the year of Shampoo. This was the year of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. This was the year of Jaws. You know, Jaws has a little happy twist at the end, but these are all films where people die, pointless things happen. The protagonists don't win the movie. Cynical power structures work to keep people away from, more sort of hopeful goals. This was a year when a film like Night Moves should have landed and been the thing that, one of the films that everybody was talking about. But audiences are fickle. I mean, it had Arthur Penn, it had Gene Hackman, and it had this kind of dark, twisted tale. But it didn't land, despite getting really good reviews, and I'll post some down below as I usually do. People didn't go to see it. Since then, its reputation has just grown and grown and grown and grown, and today it would be considered one of the great neo-noirs of the 1970s, but at the time, not so much. One of the things that really works about the film, and I think contributes a lot to its sense of unease before you even know that there's something to be uneasy about, is Dede Allen's editing. Dede Allen is an editor from the 70s and after who is talked about a lot, but editing is hard to measure. And so we look at her work on Bonnie and Clyde and we see the kind of opening jump cuts and then the wild editing of the shootout at the end with the multiple camera angles and multiple camera scenes and the way she really captures a kind of ballet of violence in her editing there. And then we go, yeah, and then she kept editing. Why? Why did Arthur Penn keep coming back to her? Why did she make multiple films with Sidney Lumet and a host of other filmmakers? Why did Warren Beatty call her up to do Reds with the hundreds of hours of film that he had shot for that, and she had to, you know, supervise a whole team of editors to manage it all. Not just because she was good, not just because she was efficient, but because she had a style. She had to develop a style, and the jump cutty bits are just one small part of it, but they relate to something that she does in Night Moves really well. So one of the things that Dede Allen liked to do was to avoid too much coverage. So in standard Hollywood continuity editing, I've talked about this in other videos, you get typically an establishing shot. So when we go to a new location, we see the inside of the restaurant, we see the front of the high school, we see the boatyard, we see the detective agency, and then we slowly close in. So in a standard situation, if we have two characters, you get the establishing shot, then you get the two shot where we see both of them, and it's wide enough that we can see them both and we can understand where they are in relation to the location. Where are they sitting in the restaurant? Where's the bar? Where's the entrance? And so on. If we're in a boatyard, where is the boathouse? Where is the dock? And so on. Are they standing on the dock? We see the water behind them, so on. And then we often go to what's called shot, reverse shot. That's a shot of the first person to speak, and we see them kind of in close up or medium close up. And then reverse shot, which is a reverse of the first one, and we go to the other person, and now she says something, and we cut back and forth. Sometimes we stay on the person who's not speaking so we can see their reaction. Sometimes we cut back and forth only to the speakers. There's different ways to do it, but that's kind of standard coverage in Hollywood continuity editing, and Dede Allen felt like a lot of that was wasteful. So she got rid of it. And she does that in different ways throughout her career, and what she does in Night Moves, I think is really important to the feel of the film, is that she cuts out of a scene before it feels like it's really ended, right into the next scene without any kind of establishing shot. So she doesn't do what a lot of films do. If a character is leaving a scene and going to another scene, the film often kind of announces it. The character will say, oh, I gotta go see a man about a dog. And then we cut to him walking up to the man and there's a dog there, right? Or, for example, in the first scene I'm going to show you, or the first example I'm going to show you, Harry might say to Ellen, oh, I've got to go interview my new client now. I'll talk to you later. And then we'll see him walk out of the gallery and then walk up to the client's house and knock on the door. That would be kind of standard. But this is how Dede Allen does it.
Shall I come back?
Is she taking it?
She wants to see it in place.
Charles? When are we going bowling again?
You seem to get some weird kind of satisfaction from this sort of thing, don't you?
Are you the kind of detective who, once you get on a case, nothing can get you off it? Bribes, beatings, the allure of a woman's
That was true in the old days, before we had a union.
First of all, what you get from that is a sense of motion. Like, we're just going to go from one scene to the next, and it keeps the pace of the film. There's a languorous pace to the sort of first hour or so of the film that's different from a lot of detective crime films. But it's languorous and moving at the same time, and if you've seen it, you know what I mean. But it also creates a mild sense of confusion. It's not majorly confusing. You're never like, wait, what's he doing? Where is it? What's going on? But by going quickly from one scene to the next without explaining, without having characters sort of subtly let you know, it causes you to just kind of think, wait, where are we? Oh, I get it. Maybe you don't even notice your brain think that because the adjustment is so quick. But your brain thinks that, like, wait, what? Right? And so we get this scene of sort of nice domesticity, and then we cut to Arlene in her sort of decadent, holding on to her beauty and youth, and with no indication of how much time has passed, or even that that's what Harry was going to do next. And the film does this repeatedly, about every 10 minutes or so. Here's another one that's kind of less integral to the plot, although it is, but I really like the one little nod to continuity. So Harry's gone to a football game, like I said, he's a former professional football player, and we get this cut. So there's no sense there that the game has ended, that they've stopped watching it. It's just like, here they are, and boom. And we get the little nod to it with the kick of the ball. But we haven't been to this location yet with Quentin the mechanic. So we don't know where we are at first. And again, it's that little hitch, that little like, wait, what? Another really great, I think, kind of powerful example comes after Harry has tracked down Marty, the man Ellen's having the affair with. He goes to Marty first because he wants to, as he says, like, know where I stand before he confronts Ellen. And so we get kind of a long scene of him confronting Marty that ends like this.
Let's just stick with you and Alan.
You even told me how you were left by your parents when you were very young and you were brought up by relatives
Knock off the
and what kind of
goddamn
effect
crap,
that had
Alan.
on you and how you always...
I don't want to know what she told you about me.
should. It's a clue, isn't it? I mean, isn't that what you do? Look for clues. Didn't you track down your parents and find them, Mr. Keene, tracer of lost persons?
Don't swing on
You're
it,
sure
Heller.
that you weren't trailing Ellen when you saw us? Well, come on, take a swing at me, Harry, the way Sam Spade would.
Why didn't you come to me?
I want to see what he looked like.
Again, there's no sense that that scene with Marty has come to its kind of natural conclusion before we cut to the next scene. And just one more quick one. This is after he's confronted Ellen and he's told her that he has to go down to Florida, his first trip to Florida, to wrap up this case. And she wants him to stay. Now that it's out in the open, she wants to work it out. And she's like, if you go just to solve this case, then, you know, you're abandoning me. And he's like, I've got to do it. It's my job, and so on. And here's how the cut worked.
Ah, the hell with it. Let's not make such a big deal out of it, Ellen. You know, you were screwing around, you got caught. Happens all the time.
No, it doesn't. Not to us. Go tomorrow, one day.
Ellen, either way, I
How
have
much
to go.
Why? So you can pretend you're solving something?
Para su cabello, acondicionador Huela.
So there's none of this like flying into the airport, a sign that says welcome to Key West or anything like that. It's just he leaves and boom, he's on the highway in Florida. And the film does this repeatedly, like I said, every 7 minutes, every 10 minutes or so. And I think the effect of it is, yes, to move the film along, but because each time, and it's not every cut, it's just, you know, every sort of fifth cut or something like that. If anybody out there wants to count the ratio, that'd be great. But I haven't got that much into it. But every time it happens, it creates a quick little hitch, like I said. And that creates part of the slow unease that's building in the film before the narrative even tells us there's something to be uneasy about. The editing, the film's form or its style starts to deliver this unease, starts to prepare us for the last sort of 30 to 40 minutes where everything's uneasy in the narrative, in Harry's mind, in his relationship, and so on. And that's the power of a stylist like Dee Dee Allen, who understands that she's not just putting pictures together so that an audience can sit there and follow the story. Her editing is adding to the story. It's coloring, shading, commenting on the story, sometimes in ways that you don't notice at first, but it's there almost from the beginning. It's also worth mentioning quickly Michael Small's music, which, like Schifrin's in Charlie Varick, does a great job of mixing kind of typical sort of 70s detective music with some jazzy stuff, some sexy stuff, some really subtle musical cues throughout the film. It's a great score, and Small was a really good composer of thriller type films, and he had done already at this point Clute, another totally sort of scuzzy 70s crime film. He'd also do The Parallax View, The Marathon Man, a great psychological thriller from a couple years later. And his music in Night Moves is fantastic. If you haven't seen Night Moves, I highly recommend it. I wish I could talk more about the ending, but some of you have seen it, know what I mean, and those of you who haven't, it's really a case where sometimes I spoil on this channel, but I don't want to, because it's not like, you know, a Usual Suspects kind of twist. It's a natural twist. It's an organic twist that comes out of the film, but it's so fascinating to watch it unfold and to watch Harry's reaction. If you like crime films, if you're tired of the sort of conventional crime films that are very predictable that tend to come out these days, or if you're just a fan of 70s film, those sort of dark, cynical, twisty, you know, that kind of everything's a little nasty if you look deep enough, then you really have to check out this movie. The direction, the editing, the music's great, Hackman's great, all of the performances are fantastic. James Woods, who I know is James Woods these days, has this really kind of vital energy. He's only in about 3 or 4 scenes. There's all these 70s faces show up. I talked about this with Charlie Varick, you know. Very few conventionally attractive Hollywood people, more like these people have lived. And it's like immensely watchable throughout the film, from the opening scene, which is just a cool green Mustang driving through the streets of LA, all the way to that last scene of the boat endlessly circling. Thanks for watching, everybody. My name's Aaron Hunter. I would love if you give this film a like, a thumbs up, and if you've been watching a few of my videos, to hit the subscribe button. Just do it, man. I'll be back with another 70s sort of scuzzy crime film in the next video. Until next time, thanks so much for watching. I'm Aaron Hunter. Keep watching movies.